Right. And we haven't mentioned the energy efficiency, but you might recall when I talked about the partnership with the town, and that the town actually pays the utilities, but the corporation needs to pay for the energy systems. So we are committed to the sustainability values of the town, and are going to be creating energy efficient systems. So we just think it's important for people to know that. Jeff, did you want to say anything else about that? Okay. Cynthia? Yes, so as you know, you can't really get approval from the HDC until it's a final plan, and as we've been talking, this has been planning and planning and planning. We're getting closer and closer and closer, you know, to a final plan. But Jeff, would you like to address that?
Yeah, so I don't have. This thing. Now John's got it. Yeah, like give me 2 minutes. Well, one is Concord Public Schools, I think. This is, yeah, I don't know. Mary Butcher.
Well, whether it's trust or whatever, you've got something funny that looks like you're able to pay. You're allowed to use
Does anybody need a copy of?
There's my. I call the meeting of the Concord Finance Guidelines Subcommittee to order. Please note are being recorded. So, with that said, we have, do we have any minutes? I don't know that I've seen any minutes to approve. Is it available? I don't think so. I don't believe we have any. Our next agenda item is the Concord Public Schools, Concord Carlisle Regional School District presentation. So why don't you folks step up to the chair?
Why don't you go there?
Okay.
Give them an extra one.
That's what I'm sort of sorting. Stuff now.
So just a note for committee members and anybody at the table, if you could speak into a microphone, it would be helpful for those listening at home. That's just a recommendation. Oddly, there are not enough microphones to go around for all the seated participants, so you may have to just grab one. Heather, you may have to grab one.
I'll lean into Andrea here.
Yeah, okay, very good. Fine.
And Carl can share. Do you want me to kick off? Okay. Great. So actually, I will lean into Andrea because I'm just going to kick it off. Jump in as soon as I can.
Okay.
So I know most people here, but not all. I'm Heather Bowd. I'm on both school committees, and I am the chair of the budget subcommittee. So whereas last year we had two of each committee chair up here, just because I've been more involved with the budget, well, both last year and also this year as the budget subcommittee chair. I wanted to kick it off. And really just say, as most of you know already, Dr. Hunter and Jared Stanton have been leading us in a rebuilding of both the budget and the budget process this year. So through the zero-based budgeting approach, which is completely new to our districts, I'm not sure if it's forever, for a long time, but for a long time, they're really defining the actual needs in each budget area. And it gives us, the school committees, a really clear view of our current expenses and our budgetary needs going forward. So it's been very helpful to all of us already. In the budget subcommittee itself, Jared's given us a really great detailed insight into areas that are being reorganized or adjusted, so we have a really good feel for that and what transfers are happening or whatever may be. And Lori's provided exceptional leadership in finding ways to work more efficiently throughout the districts in all kinds of areas. You know that we know that the legal fee rates are a demonstration of Lori, Jared's, and the school committee's commitment to examining really every cost critically and making responsible changes as we see fit. So we figured that would bring a smile to all of your faces also, to see a lower legal fee rate in our budget lines. And even in an area like special education, where we need to increase services in various ways, Lori and her team have found ways to do that within the existing budget. This year, and within similar trajectories for next year, she's essentially doing more for the same, or even in some cases less cost than we have been before. So we have been extremely impressed with both the process and the transparency, as well as the educational execution of it from both of them. And I guess as chair of the budget subcommittee and a member of both school committees, I just really wanted to express my full support of and admiration of the budget creation that's currently in process. So just wanted to put it out there, and with that, I'll hand it over to Lori and Jared. And I should introduce them, actually. Most of you have met them, but in case you haven't, Dr. Lori Hunter, our esteemed superintendent, and Jared Stanton, our new director of finance, who's leading us in this process. So off to them.
Thank you.
And you all know, Joanna Boynton, who's chair of Concord Public Schools School Committee.
Great. So I'm going to open it up, and most of the meat Jared's going to be talking you through, but just a little bit of context as to where we are tonight. Just like a year ago when we came at the later part of October, we are still building. We just can't build next year's budget till school is actually open for this year because we need that live data in order to inform what we're doing going forward. So tonight, the purpose of our discussion tonight, and we're back in November after we've presented to the school committee on the 13th, we don't have the line item budget for you as of yet, but what we have are the major cost drivers that really feed into the foundational work of the budget and essentially predict much of where we're going to land, because barring any additional program we're going to propose, which as of right now, no such thing exists, you can start to get the landscape as to how the budget's going to build. So there is no line item tonight. There's no what is the percentage increase. We're not ready to do that. Jared's going to talk you through all the extraordinary work we've been doing. I've sat here over the last 6 to 12 months and told you that we would be starting from zero. We have done that. We are looking for every opportunity for efficiencies and review of how we are operating. So you'll hear of those tonight, and we're happy to make this a dialogue and take questions as we go. So we're hoping just for a great conversation. Okay?
Great. Hi, everybody. So what you have in front of you are the 2 budget booklets, preliminary budget books, that we did in the business office. It was a complete group effort. And I'm going to be going over some of the key highlights of those budget books. What I want people to see is the way that we're doing things now, the way that we're doing things for the future, the way the budget book, when we have the superintendent's recommended budget, will be laid out. It will be by school location or a district-wide instead of what you've seen in the past, which has been program. We've noticed, and I've gotten feedback, that it's confusing and people didn't really know what their lines were, or the general public didn't really understand, you know, what funds were going to which school and which department. So without further ado, so as you know, we're doing a zero-based budget. That means we're going through every single line, starting from scratch. You're obviously starting with your salaries. It's about 80% of your budget, a little less on the CC side. And the budget process really started July 1st. It was officially introduced to the principals on August 21st at our retreat, and we've been going hard ever since. This Friday will be, all of the numbers are due to me, and then I'm going to be putting them into my budget and figuring out exactly where we are. But some of the highlights of a zero-based budget is what we're doing. We're looking at 3 to 5 years worth of actuals. We're looking at obviously the salaries. We're looking at legal, but also included in the salaries is longevity, building that up. Looking at substitutes, stipends, overtime. We're also looking at all of the contract services, memberships, looking into professional development, special education, looking at in-district services. We're looking at out-of-district services, tuitions. We're doing a staffing model for tutors, insurance, and then all supplies, materials, textbooks, softwares, hardware, leases, etc. We're looking at everything. We're looking for redundancies, and we're trying to figure out what we need and what we don't. Cell phones we're looking into, copiers.
Jared, could I just point out
Please.
for everybody that when he's talking about meeting with principals, he's having all the principals likewise do the same exercise in their buildings and start from
Right.
the ground up and
Yep.
build from there versus what you had and what you need increases to what you had starting fresh. So what he's saying with the numbers there, he's
Yeah.
due is their
Yep.
work with their faculty to get it.
So yeah, we've had many discussions with the principals, but then we've gone to the schools. We met with the department heads at the high school, the department heads at the middle school. Ian Rames, the assistant business manager, has been instrumental in putting this together. He's been meeting with them one-on-one. It's new to everybody. So really this process, we're sort of holding their hand. Like I said, it's new to everybody, but it's setting us up for years to come. So all the hard work is being done now, and hopefully it'll get easier with time. So some of the timeline dates. Starting on October 1st, the enrollment was sent to all of the principals so they could see what their October 1st enrollment is and plan for their supplies and materials for FY20. On October 9th, we presented the same presentation to the school committee. Tonight, I'm presenting to you all. On October 24th, we're expecting a budget questionnaire due to Carlisle. FY20 on October 29th, the FY20 budget meeting with the Carlisle Finance Committee. The 30th, we're expecting a tentative guideline from the FinCom in Concord. Yep.
Next week we hear,
Yeah.
actually.
Next week, that would be great. We're going to be releasing our budget on November 13th, the superintendent's recommended budget. School committee budget hearings on November 27th. Some TBD dates for Carlisle and their guideline budget. As you all know, we are doing the campus advisories, has a number of projects out there that Gail is looking into. Their cost study is due to us on December 14th of what it would cost in that feasibility study, so we can study that, work with the subcommittee, the school committee to get what we want to meet your January 4th warrant. Some other dates, December 18th, the school committee deadline to adopt a budget for Concord. Again, the warrant article is due on the 4th of January. December 19th, school committee votes the assessment to the member towns. Our budget book, it will be somewhat revised, will be due out on January 15th. And then some other dates, 22nd of January for Carlisle warrant article due, governor's budget is due, so that comes out on the 23rd. And then we'll have our initial governor projections for the regional. Public hearing in Concord in late February, as well as putting a TBD in for the legal deadline, and then the public hearings, and then the town meetings. So quite an extensive timeline here, but it's pretty spelled out, and we plan on meeting every single deadline.
Sorry, Jared, can I just regress for 1 second? Back to your first slide and maybe ask if this is a process question that you address later, that's fine.
Sure.
But my understanding of ZBB is that it allows you to prioritize or reprioritize according to where you think things should be spent, as opposed to where someone years ago thought things might be spent. So my question is, your first slide, does that mean that maybe some categories have been eliminated and some new categories have been created? Is that part of the process?
Sure. So yeah, what we're doing is, right now we're allowing people to give us their zero base. But we're meeting with all of the principals, are meeting with the administrators on the 29th of October and November 2nd for the high school and the middle school. And we're going through every request, seeing what makes the most sense. So right now, I'm working with them. I'm the first vet. I'm vetting it. And so yes, we will prioritize. But right now, it's just getting it on paper and spelling out exactly what is in their head, what they want.
Right.
And then once we figure out what the number is, once I plug everything in, then we either say, or Dr. Hunter says okay, or we start looking at everything and figuring out what we need to do to meet the guideline.
Okay, so some categories could disappear and some new ones could appear.
Sure. Yeah, we're hoping to consolidate. We have a number of lines, a lot of redundancies. So, but that's more of a 2-year process, but we're cutting out quite a bit this year as well.
Thank you.
Just to give you a really concrete idea of what zero-based budgeting it means we have an actual itemized list of every expenditure that they're expecting to utilize against the line items. So that is a pretty labor-intensive process for them, but that's what we're demanding and asking of our leadership team and the department chairs. So then they have to justify everything that's on that itemized list. Certainly some things are recurring costs, and that part isn't as big of a discussion. If they're asking for additional funds, then that's where the conversation really starts. So Jared's the first line. I'm not unaware of what's going on in those lines, but he's going to talk with them first and then bring it to me after we've packaged an entire budget together.
So the following slide is the high school's budget performance by DESI's 1000 function. So this is, DESI, as you know, comes up, it's in the appendices in the back of the books. They have their functions, and this is how we, the adopted budget for FY17 per function category, FY17 actuals, and the delta. And then FY18, we started to do some heavy transfers in FY18. So we actually compared the FY transferred budget to the actuals and the difference between that. So I just
Transfer
sure. So it's budget transfers. So we have
from one category to another.
for one category, or really from one line to another, and this is rolled up by the 1,000 function.
I think you'll recall we've said we had realignments to do, and that's what those transfers are doing. What's happened because we built FY19 before all the transfers is we're still having to transfers for this year, but FY20 will be clean of that because we've done all the realignment as we've built through the zero-based budget. So some of those swings will notably disappear once we're into FY20. We're actively doing the same transfer process in FY19, but we're not going to need to do that going forward.
In the following chart is how CPS performed in FY17 compared to the actuals, as well as FY18. And all of these are in your book as well. So what we did, we went a little step further, and we started to say, okay, in our chart of accounts, we have different locations. So preschool is a location, obviously the elementary schools, the middle school, we have a district-wide. We wanted to see how did we score, how did our numbers align with the DESI functions per location. So the following charts are how they score, how we did per function, DESI function. So the first one is the preschool. Again, it's FY17 compared to the actuals, FY18 adopted compared to transfers, and the delta between the two and the actuals. So the first one is the preschool.
So you're basically doing what you always have a problem with, which is trying to get your expenditure to line up with
Correct.
something. Okay.
Yep. So the first chart that you saw by the 1,000 function, if you added everything up in that first chart, it would add up to what I'm presenting by locations. This is just breaking that first 1,000 chart up by the location. So we have a kindergarten location that's district-wide. As you can see, it's very short money. We'll most likely be moving these functions into an elementary account, which is also another location that I'll go through. But for purposes of how the money was spent in FY17 and FY18, it was broken up this way. CPS elementary district-wide. And then the Alcott School. In my first presentation to the school committee, we broke out the kindergarten. What we did for this presentation is we put all the kindergarten in the elementary schools minus that short district-wide 37,000. Here is Thoreau.
Peter, which one do you need?
Just the,
Slides.
oh, they are.
Oh, here it comes around.
Thank you.
Anybody else need booklets or paperwork?
And then we have the Willard. And then, as you can see, the middle school, little less than a third of that budget. And then we have district-wide.
And what is that?
That's really things that do not fit directly into the school accounts. So we have, we have district-wide, like health insurance would be in district-wide, the administration, the Ripley building, really things that are district-wide. If we have people that go to a number of different schools, potentially they could be in this. So just items that do not fit into these categories. And when we do the budget booklet, everything will be spelled out, so you'll see by the chart of accounts what makes up these numbers. But we're trying to, the goal is to bring this district-wide down and bring it to the schools. And you're gonna notice, I can tell you already, FY20's requested budget will have a less request in the district-wide than in years past, because we're moving monies.
So it'll be allocated to the
Yeah.
different schools?
Yeah.
So it'd be spent at Ripley, but you'll do a cost accounting?
Not, well, as we go through the zero-based process, we're really putting things where they should be, and where, so if it's a particular stipend for a particular school, in years past, it may have been put in a district-wide account.
Got it.
So
So it's not just like.
It's
allocating
salaries,
that,
no,
Just, okay.
yeah,
Like
no.
a literacy person that sits in Ripley? No.
No.
Got it. It's, if Alcott
Yeah.
hired a consultant for something, you might have been put in the Ripley chart of accounts before, but starting to go forward, not anymore.
Correct, yeah. So we've been asked what we've done to some restructuring and some reporting changes. So last year, the district eliminated one administrator position and 1.5 support positions, as well as some savings to HR, as well as my position. So the elimination of the 3.5 FTEs was $257,000. And through attrition and again some redoing the reorganizing human resources, we're realizing another $85,000. We've also put an RFP out for a new school committee and special education lawyer. Happy to say that we accepted the rates, and it's going from $1,100 to $210 per hour. So the cost savings, we can't put that, we don't know exactly what it will be, but we anticipate it to be significant. Also, as you know, DESE is constantly revamping their chart of accounts. It feels like yearly trying to keep up with their chart of accounts, to keep up with ours, because the main goal is when somebody goes on DESE's website, we should be able to run a report from our system and almost mirror what that because we give them that information, what that information is. So IT has constantly been a 1,000 function, which is administration, and they're now trying to boil it down to the instructional level. So so you'll see that administration's costs will go down. Now, other districts, it's really not apples to apples. They have been ahead of this and have done this in the past. So it's something that now we're changing our chart of accounts to be in line with how things should be reported. And again, you'll see the appendices in the back, Appendix A, that will give you the full chart of accounts.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mary.
I've got a question. I'm still going back to these charts where you restated from the budget to the transferred budget, and I'm comparing the transferred budget or the budget to the actuals. Do we have anything here which adds this all up to say, overall, for CPS in FY18, how much did you come in under budget?
Well, the delta at the bottom is the difference. So at CPS, it was 0 in FY18. In the CCHS, due to OPEB and debt and other things,
Yeah. So there are differences among the schools, but the bottom line, it's 0.
the bottom line is 0. Yeah, so some schools, when I do transfers, I actually don't do it by a location level. I do it by an account level.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah.
I remember a few meetings ago, Carrie, you showed us something where the schools contributed money back. Where's Carrie? Carrie, do you remember?
missed the meeting where that was zeroed out.
Never mind. Oh, never mind. I missed the meeting.
It's all right. It's okay. My jaw dropped. That was corrected in the following meeting. It's
Okay,
all-
good.
it's all
I thought we were getting a lot of money back, but I guess I missed the meeting. Or we weren't.
I just want to, before Jared does the next slide of special education numbers, I want to talk on the restructuring and reorganizations. Those are just a couple of examples. Probably the other one that's really noteworthy to highlight tonight is our work in special education. We've now conducted comprehensive reviews of our K through 12 special education programs. You'll remember I referenced the high school one last year. We've now finished and have the K-8 report. And we are actively reorganizing. So we opened this school year with both Thoreau and the high school completely reorganized in how they're delivering many of the in-house special education services. We've moved away from such a reliance on the tutor positions and have made sure that our certified staff are the front line of service provision to the kids. That allowed for some reduction of tutors because when the qualified people are providing services, they're directly supporting students in their deficit areas rather than the model before, which was a lot of more generic support to kids on assignments that perhaps weren't as targeted to what those needs were. So that's been really positive and exciting. The other major effort, and I know we talked a little bit about this last year, has been to build our in-district programs. We opened at Thoreau with a district-wide, they came from preschool and kindergarten. They're now in kindergarten and first grade. There's 7 really cute little guys in there who definitely would have been out of district if we hadn't created this program. And they're in a setting where they're not in the mainstream most of the day, but when appropriate, they are. I have seen them in a music class with a kindergarten environment, and they're thriving. And their families are excited they're still here in district, and we're all growing because of their presence in our schools. Since school opened, because of some of those savings I mentioned with the tutors, we've been able to identify other kids in need. And rather than the phone call coming to me that says, I've got 2 kids I don't know that I can maintain here, we're now looking at what staff we need to keep them here and trading some of the budgeted tutor money for additional certified teachers. So we're building programs even as we speak. We hired a social emotional teacher for the elementary schools last week, and we're about to finalize a middle school teacher, and only expect that this will be the momentum that we build. What we need is a comprehensive continuum, obviously, but in the meantime, as we build that, if kids are in need and there's a way to do better by them before they go out of district, we're going to do that. So it's a pretty significant shift in our attitude and mindset, very well received by parents so far. We've met with our Special Education Parents Advisory Council, and certainly other families individually have given us that support. Many people want their kids here, and we need to provide the programs to give them those options. So I have to say we're farther ahead than I ever would have thought because of the momentum of the people in the schools and the staff and the leaders who said, this is what you want us to do. We're thrilled. We've been waiting. Here we go. I thought the high school reconfiguration was a year out. They jumped in February and reorganized their entire special education delivery service to do it this fall. So there's a lot of really great energy and momentum. I come here and make sure you hear about kids. We are serving kids better, and that's the most exciting part, but I also anticipate our costs are going to be impacted. I can't say we've brought a kid back from out of district yet because of one of these programs. We do that every so often anyway, but you have to build the program first. So that you have a tangible, concrete site for parents and folks to see. We have definitely saved cost in not having, I sit here October 18th and have not sent one child out of district yet so far this school year, which is not the pattern we've been living under. So just a lot of positive momentum. So the numbers here are what they are, but I think there'll be a lot more to come as we continue to change and grow. All right, now you can do the numbers.
Yes. All numbers. So I thought it was important for everyone to see what revenues we have to pay our tuitions. So a lot of people just pay attention to the general fund, but we also have circuit breaker and we have a 240 IDEA special ed grant. So in FY17, as you can see on that slide, we broke it out to say how much are we paying for the general fund, circuit breaker, and IDEA for both FY17 and FY18. When we do the FY20 budget, we will also be breaking up and telling you how much we have in tuitions, how much of that is being applied to circuit breaker, and how much of that is being applied to the IDEA grant. So here is CPS's portion.
What is IDEA?
Sure, it's there's actually a glossary in the back too. We put that in there because there's gonna be a lot of those questions. So I can refer you to there if it's not in there. And that glossary is gonna grow. We're gonna grow that for years and years to come for questions.
It's in the booklet.
It's in the booklet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
IDEA is the federal special education grant. Circuit breaker is essentially Massachusetts subsidies, so they're both federal and state subsidies.
But at the time of building the budget, they're anticipated.
They're anticipated.
You don't know
Yep.
until you're in the year.
Yep. A lot of times grants come in under, so sometimes we budget revenues somewhat conservatively. I usually go about 3% less. But right now in circuit breaker, the lady that does the circuit breaker calculation is, as of today, what we're anticipating for FY20, and she's pretty spot on. If you're 10 to 15,000 off, that's really good, and she's right around that ballpark. So what we're going to be doing for FY20s is as late as we can get, and we'll be pretty close to that number unless there's a move-in, obviously, after that time. And we'll be getting more money in circuit breaker.
So just a question about the slide and the words being used here. You're calling these tuitions. Are these for out-of-district
They are.
placements?
Yep.
They're not. This is not our expenses for SPED within the district.
They're
These
not.
are out-of-district placements and the funds that we use to cover that.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yep.
Idea grants, is that an ongoing source of funding which can go up and down depending on your population? It's not like you have a 2-year grant to do something.
Correct.
type of number.
It's a yearly grant.
It's called a grant, but it
an
comes,
entitlement.
money
Entitlement.
comes every year and something.
Right.
Do you get idea money for kids that you service in district that have, or idea classifications?
You can use
Yeah,
the grant
right.
for a range of services. Right now, because our numbers are as substantial as they are, we are using that grant essentially for out-of-district tuitions in both districts. But you can hear where I'm going. The hope is as we lower tuitions, we'll be able to offset some of the other services within the more typical special education provisions.
So you may get money based on some kids that you're servicing in district.
Yeah, there's a pretty wide range.
But in terms of when you take the revenue, you apply it over here.
Right, so I just want to clarify the two. Circuit breaker is out-of-district kids, essentially. That's
Yep.
Massachusetts reimbursement program. The federal one has a lot more latitude to
Yep.
it, so you can use it for tuitions, but you can use it for other services too. Right now, we're highly focused on tuitions,
Right.
and hopefully we can reduce that focus as we go.
Understood.
And the good thing I have to say that I walked into here with the IDEA grant is you really don't want to use it for salaries, especially professional staff that get MTRS, because then you're paying it twice. You're paying it through the grant because they take it right off the top, and then you have to also pay it through the general fund. So we have no salaries in our grants, which is a really good thing, because when I came in looking for savings, that's the first place a business manager goes, and I was like, oh, can't find any savings there. So they had already been doing that, so kudos to them on that. So the following slide is the CCHS tuitions. Same breakdown. So a little bit about education reform and mandates. Do you want to take this section?
Yeah, sure. We're very grateful. The state has realized that its pace of initiatives was much too aggressive, probably 5 years ago, and has slowed that pace. So I can't say that we see brand new initiatives that come with some of the unfunded mandate tone that had been happening. But those mandates that were put in those numbers of years ago and have continued to up in demand doesn't mean they don't have impact. So the English language learners, our population continues to grow. We now have 4 full-time English language learner teachers across the 5 schools, 4 of them at CPS and 1 at the high school. So we're constantly having to monitor those numbers, and we are by law mandated to assess kids the minute they register and identify them, and then the service delivery is dependent on their level of proficiency in English. So that's an ongoing piece we have to be very diligent to watch. Teacher evaluation, that is a reform from 7 to 8 years ago. Very rigorous, robust teacher evaluation program came in with multiple steps and many more observations than in the past, and much more evidence provided to us by teachers. And the reason I bring it up right now is the elementary people are the only evaluators in their schools. So what is supposed to be a really productive conversation between teacher and evaluator, because of the sheer volume right now, we are shortcutting that. So there's going to have to be some discussion on the model we're using there. That's another reorganization, is the elementary leadership model that we're working under, and what are the options. That's some of the work we're doing now as we build the budget. It will, at worst case, be cost neutral, but we're trying to figure out how we go about providing a better system that's much more effective. Grants and reimbursements, you know, the story on the grants, the circuit breaker story kind of tells the story itself. A year ago, we sat here with the special education subsidies from the state dropping in September from up around 70% down to 62%, and every district just was told they had to absorb that. By the later part of the year, the legislators, with a lot of advocacy from the individual and collective superintendents, rallied, and there was some establishment to push that back up, which is what we just panned out with the late notice that we got for the FY19 budget, that it was reset back to 72%. So that is a moving target all the time, and the state tends to ebb and flow depending on their expected revenues. So that's always the story of the grants. I think that was some of June's point. So we get some entitlements that stay pretty stable, barring changes at the federal level, which is probably some things we've seen happen more recently that were never predicted before. One Title II grant just dropped dramatically. There's definitely impact of a new administration at times. So grants we're just always having to watch and try to predict. That said, the entitlement ones tend to be stable enough that you can budget pretty large amounts of money off of them. So moving targets is essentially the message that we just wanted to be sure to remind you of. Sometimes they're in our favor, right? So it's not typical, but it was this past month. Yeah.
So the next slide is the high school enrollment for an in-depth enrollment picture for CPS. That's also in the appendices. But these will be the numbers that we will be using for the FY20 assessment. They're as of October 1st.
So the ones that I know are of great importance to you are the split between Concord and Carlisle. It's essentially within 2 to 3 kids different in both towns. So there's no substantial change to the assessment like there was a year ago. If you look in the back appendices of the booklet, you can see the comparatives from last year to this year. But essentially, the split is staying as it was last year.
Capital planning. So right now, we are developing a 5-year capital plan that we're presenting to Dr. Hunter at the beginning of next month. So this is for the CPS level. Our biggest need right now absolutely is the telephone system. It's outdated. The parts, they don't make them anymore. It's a safety issue, and it's something that we must take care of, we really must for next year. So we're really looking into that. We're getting quotes, et cetera, on that. Also, there's going to be we're looking into the elementary schools, we're looking into Ripley. Like I said, we're planning out 5 years, so we know that we have some boiler replacements coming in FY23 and 24, some ERUs, energy recovery units. The middle school, obviously.
I'm going to correct him,
yes.
The biggest need is the middle school,
Oh.
not the telephone system.
The middle school, obviously, a replacement. For next year, though, the telephone system.
There we go.
Just kidding. Never correct my boss. Just
Whole
kidding.
middle school.
So, but every year for the middle school that we have it, we're increasing the maintenance on it. So it's.
Yeah, we're just timelines in terms of where we are with MSBA. We expect usually it's the week after Thanksgiving that they call and tell me where we are. We made the upper tier again, so we're in their consideration. Having made it through, they get 80 or so usually every year. We're in that last 30 to 40, so that's where we were a year ago. That's good news, but it's all comparative to who's in the pool. They get a cent on every dollar in sales tax, so their revenue typically is $550 to $600 million. That's the pocket of money. So if there's If there's a Lowell High School in there for $200 million where they're subsidizing most of that project, you can see how quickly the available money for the other districts starts to minimize. So that's the message we're hearing from them. They validated the need, so that's good news. But we can't predict where we're going to be. I'm on a training webinar conference call with them on Monday. Just the more I stay in front of them, I figure it helps, and see if we can get any further information. But typically, that call comes right after the Thanksgiving break, and then the committee will meet and discuss what we do from there.
So my question here is actually for our committee representatives, and that is that a study was done regarding the middle school that identified millions and millions of dollars worth of work that would need to be done in order to make it basically viable, which drives us towards this decision point. We really need a new school or a substantial renovation of what we're doing. However, there was a 0 to 2 year category, which was actually several $1 million. Have you picked anything off that list? I'm really looking at the committee members here. Several $1 million, and when we go to the school committee meetings as observers, what we hear is that an infrastructure failure could cause us to not be able to deliver education in an entire building. So what are we doing about that? I mean, are we going to kind of dig in and spend some money, or are we just going to keep trying to coast? What's the plan?
I think the answer is we are taking care of the things that we absolutely have to, so that we don't have, or so that we can avoid to the extent possible an infrastructure failure that actually prohibits us from delivering education. If there's something we feel is that big a risk, we'll go forward. And until then, we're trying not to put money into these buildings that's not absolutely necessary, because it really feels like throwing money away unless we have to. There are a few things that we've done on the bill. I mean, we've had to do work on the septic systems because it had to be done. A few of the other things come up. So absolutely, things that are urgent are being taken care of.
I think what you're asking, the work we're doing, is the Band-Aid kind of approach, rather than the, are we going to replace a major system? The septic is the one that comes to my mind first. We have not taken on a big project, replacing the entire extent of a system, trying not to throw good money after bad. I think another response from MSBA is going to give us a lot more to think on. To not get in twice, I think, starts to make us wonder what.
My concern
our
was
success
that
would be.
category of 0 to, I think it was 0 to 2 years, had several items that were, I think, of a regulatory nature, or they were, things that really it said 0 to 2 years, you gotta do, and we're not seeing those brought forward. I'm sorry I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but those things didn't sound like they were trivial.
They aren't trivial.
So it's, as I said, this is actually directed more towards the committee.
Well, I think, it's a point well taken. I think we haven't, we've been a little treading water to see what might happen to kind of make that 3 to 5 year plan. But you're absolutely right. Some of that has to be forecasted out.
But you're not going to have a new building for 3 years at a minimum.
Right.
And some of these things probably need to be taken care of in the next 3 years. So we probably ought to have a very serious conversation about what's on that list and what really should we be doing. Because if, the 0 to 2 year list was done a year and a half ago now. So it's already getting to the edge of the 0 to 2, and we're starting to get into the 3 to 5. And we're not going to have a new building before like 3 years.
Sure. Right, even if we get it
Even if we get the money this year.
Absolutely.
So I'm just putting down a marker. I think you really need to have some serious conversations at the committee level about what are we doing here, to keep this building viable, because both of them, because I know we're trying to just kind of just get them over the line, but to say 3 to 4 years over the line, that's a long way.
You're completely right, absolutely. And I think part of it is the timing. We do, ideally, we want to have that conversation after we get this response in November. Not that means we're going to have a school all of a sudden next year, but it will start to inform the timeline that we're looking at.
But you'll have a very short opportunity, if you're not talking now, you'll have a very short opportunity to say, oh, we need this on the warrant. You don't,
That's right.
you gotta be
Yes,
talking
that's right.
now in
Right,
October.
well,
Absolutely, agreed,
We have
agreed.
had in the past projections of 5 years out of capital projects that we are considering. So, and I don't have that in front of me, it's not something I've looked at
Right.
recently, but it does exist in some concept that we have to go back to and reassess if those are still the things
Okay.
for some of that, but yeah.
I'm just,
No, Dean, I agree with everything you said. I watched Sanborn Friday afternoon with Justin Cameron, and I was literally taking pictures and sending stuff to Jared going, we don't have 4 and 5 years on some of these things. So I completely
yeah.
appreciate your point.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, we hired a professional consultant,
Yeah.
and this was their assessment, that in the 0 to 2 category, I think it was like $6 million. I mean, it was not nothing. So, it's something that needs to be really looked at.
Agreed.
Agreed, and we will be doing that, definitely.
That you have a schedule of capital projects that addresses that?
I'm saying in the past, we have had sort of a projected out 5 years, here's how we would anticipate looking at the capital projects. I haven't seen it in a while, but I'm saying that there has been thought in the, it's been a while, but
Would be interesting.
a year, you know, of like what we might anticipate is gonna be needed, especially in these buildings, that was the primary conversation.
So, to Dean's point, it's time to revisit it.
Yeah.
But I think Joanna's point is we're not starting it from scratch at least. There's a list to revisit and look at kind of what the priorities were, and it's time to look at that and see what we need to be working on. But we'll be working from a document and from a prioritization scale that does exist.
So Carl, just to clarify what I'm talking about, there was a consultant brought into the school committee, and there was an assessment of the middle school buildings, and they had grids of, with these things need to be done to make to keep these things
Carl
viable.
was very involved.
Well, I wasn't very, but-
And you know, when you got to the end of the line, it was like, okay, we need to spend like $46 million. I've forgotten what the number was, a big number. So that drives us toward, yeah, let's do new buildings, or let's do really big things. But in the 0 to 2 year range, there was, I think, something like between the two buildings, like $6 million worth of work that was considered critical to do
Yeah.
when that
No,
report was done.
Any of that's true.
I witnessed that process. And I just think that, you know, from the finance committee point of view, knowing, you know, these things that may be several $1 million, you know, it's better to know that in advance. rather
Agreed.
than,
Yep,
whoops.
we need to have a more thorough public discussion about it very
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
Totally agreed.
Or if things have held and not failed on the timetable predicted at the point that report was written, to go back and take a look
Go back and
with
take a look.
fresh eyes
Right.
on,
And see how they.
maybe they're
are doing.
holding better than we thought, right?
Yep.
And so, but one way or another, if there was stuff that was pointed out as mission critical,
Right.
we wouldn't wanna wake up next November and find out that, you know, the plumbing failed or something crazy.
Yep.
Fire alarm.
You're right.
No, we've
No,
got
that-
issues. I'm
yeah,
not,
it's
we're
an
not gonna say
issue.
we don't. Yep.
You're on some manual alert system for fire. Okay. All right. Sorry to divert
So,
us.
so the high school, we're also, it's not really a new school anymore. So we need a capital plan. So we're working on a capital plan, a 5-year capital plan for the high school. We're evaluating with the school committee campus advisory subcommittee the following listed items. We had a meeting this week with Gale Associates, with a number of departments from the town of Concord to go over feasibility questions that we had, they had, Gale had, so they could do their study. Like I said, we anticipate that report, the costs on the 14th of December, and the full report is due on January 31st.
So the committee will review that and then decide what, if any, of those are going forward as warrant articles. That's the point of the study, is to better inform those decisions.
So just continuing with some of the items that were on that feasibility study, in no particular order. So transportation, we wanted to do a little overview of transportation. Currently, Concord Public Schools has 22 buses. 2 of them are wheelchairs. And the high school has 20 buses, and 1 of them have a wheelchair. We also just hired a consultant to get an outside view of, are we doing things efficiently? Helping us with a 10-year replacement cycle. Taking a look at all of our runs. So that's we've already started the process with him. So that's going to be great. We should get a review done the next 2 or 3 months, and that should be public. Also, I don't know if I did a slide. I did not. In the book, there's also a couple charts on the age of our buses for both CPS and CCHS.
Sorry, Jared, you said, did the runs, looked at all the buses runs? What does that mean?
Routes.
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 Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Routes.
So in what context? Because we hear about, the need for replacing buses.
Mhm.
And then we hear about the requirement for a lot more parking because students don't want to take the buses. So have you done kind of a capacity utilization study by run or by route?
That's what this
That's
consultant
That's what
will
we
be
do.
doing. with
Getting
us.
an outside
Because
view.
where I'm going with this is, would it ever make sense for us to maybe buy a smaller bus or a minibus
Consolidate routes.
or consolidate
Yes,
routes?
that's exactly the
That's-
question we are asking.
Yep.
Absolutely. And just effectiveness and efficiency of, he's gonna give us choices, and some of this is gonna be some of the discussion we're gonna have down the road. Some of this is a service expectation, and you can modify that, and some folks might not think we, should move their stop from the end of the driveway, but those are choices we can make. And start to talk about what other options that we have. So we just needed that big picture view. He's gonna do the buses themselves. He's gonna look at the routes, the staffing, soup to nuts, we're gonna have input, and it's exactly that kind of data we'll be gathering. So we're actually pretty excited. We were pretty sure we saved money in the first entry meeting with him while we sat there and listened to him. Like, I think we did. I think he just paid his fee. I think
Yep.
we're ready to roll.
Yep.
Do our old buses have any residual value? Do we sell them to somewhere else that?
We do. We trade them in. The thing is you do not want to get them really over, I think it's 100,000 miles, because then the value really goes down. So if we can get this this replacement cycle to take that into account, we can get 15 to 20 grand trading these buses in and have a fairly healthy replacement plan.
There's a long period of time of not replacing any buses, and so we're trying to catch up and get to a more stable
Still
scenario.
leasing buses?
And we've got,
Yeah.
many
both.
that are leased.
That's part of the discussion is what's our fiscal plan here
Mhm.
too. Absolutely.
Are we having some success with the electric bus, and are there any grants for, as we're going about replacing them, using greener buses? Is that a thing?
I know there's interest. Maybe you can speak more to this.
Yeah,
but-
what I learned last year was that until the American vendors start to make the electric bus, the costs are exorbitant. It's about 3 times the cost of the other regular buses. So some of the American vendors seem to be starting to get into the market, which is where we expect to see some changes. I think we've had success with the bus. It's had its kinks that we've been, making our way through and being able to inform. I think we've been part of the process to make a more effective bus in some ways because we work collaboratively with the state. They have ongoing feedback with us. Other districts abandoned ship. We were committed and we did not. I don't think we had any issues that would have indicated we should abandon ship, but I think we stuck the course when there were little things that needed.
Maybe we could pick up a bus from somebody who decided to ban.
We actually were looking at that, Dean. Yeah, we just traded. Who gave theirs up?
Okay.
So we just did a chart here of all of our collective bargaining units for CPS and the FY19 to FY21 costs that we know of at the time.
Obviously, the standout one there is the upcoming CTA negotiations.
And then CCHS, some of them are the same, such as the secretaries, bus drivers, etc. A couple questions that I've received in FY20, you see a 2.5 to 2.75% increase for the CCTA, and the reason for that is just that's the increases between 2.5 and 2.75 in their steps. So it's not a straight COLA.
Regarding this, I know you're committed to IBB as a strategy. Are you considering any professional assistance to guide these
So we're
negotiations?
still, it's an ongoing discussion. I think you can all pipe in anywhere you'd like. We've started early discussion with CTA as to what the format's going to be. Doesn't look like we're going to go a pure IBB road. There's a definite commitment to have a collaborative process, though. So that's what we're still sorting out: is who will be there, who will, what will it look like, what will be the format. My guess it's going to feel somewhere between a traditional bargaining and an IBB, just because we've got such great rapport going with the teachers union in terms of climate and culture issues that now we need to obviously start talking on contractual issues too.
And so I'd jump in too, Dean, in terms of your question of asking for professional help. When we were interviewing the legal firms that we spoke to, one of the things we really liked about the team that we chose was that they come into it offering a lot of insight, but with a real collaborative problem-solving mindset in terms of how to go into a negotiation. So I think we'll have some great advice from them that I think will help on both sides, and we'll really come at it from a collaborative standpoint and should help the process that Lori's laid out.
Do I expect professional support? Yes, it's just a matter of what that format will be, whether it will be our new attorney or a facilitator, or that's all still moving discussions.
All right, thanks.
So other post-employment benefits, in this Concord Carlisle booklet, it has our required ARC. So we're scheduled, in the book it has a schedule from FY17 to FY38. So as of right now, we're putting in the ARC for FY20, and the school committee will make a decision. But it's important to note, a couple weeks ago we had our Moody's rating. They upheld our AAA, AAA bond rating with a they call it a risk. But one of the things that they pointed out is that we had the highest OPEB funding in the state. And then we talked about, okay, so what does that mean? Why are we at risk if we have that? So they talked about, well, your fund balance and your debt is going up and your fund balance has been going down. So when they did the weight of it, OPEB actually has a lower weight to, in their minds for that rating than having a higher fund balance.
Translate that to E&D so they
So,
know that's what you're
right,
talking
so it's stabilization. It's E&D, excess and deficiency, that's been going down. We have been, over the past X amount of years, been using E&D as a revenue source, and that's really a recipe for disaster. That's our contingency. As our own entity, we need that. So it's just really, it's not good business practice to have that as a revenue source, and the Moody Ratings has taken notice.
You have a maximum that you're 5%.
5%.
Yeah.
Right now, we anticipate it's to be about right around 2.5% for next year. Right now it doesn't exist. We got to have a preliminary audit, and then the DOR then certifies it, and it's around 2.5, 2.7 for going into next year. Now that is it's not a bad thing if you have other stabilizations, but we do not at the region. So
Does Moody's give you a recommendation of what they would prefer to see?
they can't come out and say it, but they want to see districts in our financial position to be over 3.5%. And that's ultimately our goal.
Did they publish something?
They did.
We shared with the school
Yeah.
committee. We can get it to you.
Yeah.
Could we see that?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
We just got it. Yeah, last week. Yep.
So what isn't in tonight's discussion is really what our expectation for E&D is yet in FY20. You can hear the issues we're grappling. We've got to slow down the revenue usage of E&D. So if there's one unknown sitting here today, I think that would be it, because what does that do to the percentage increase? You know, I think we're hoping to see that we can absorb some of that through the reorganizations and things like that. But the truth is, until we finish this budget, we don't know. So I think November is going to be a big month of discussing E&D and our status and the plan to slow the revenue usage down.
We've seen it going down for the
Yeah,
last few
I know
years.
you're all aware.
Know the
We need
discomfort.
to stop that
Yeah.
flow.
Yeah.
We're all very even more uncomfortable with it now. So
sticking with really Moody's and into debt service. One of the things that they did recently is that our debt service is going down. In the budget book, you see a schedule from FY17 to FY38, and we can see that each year it is going down. If we don't accrue a lot more debt, I'm sure that our rating, our high-risk rating, they will remove that, and they reevaluate that within 18 to 24 months. So we're on their watch list, as they called it, for 18 to 24 months.
I think the other day, did you say it's a negative credit
Negative.
watch?
That's a big. It's yes, negative outlook. Thank you. Negative outlook. So for more detail on the numbers of the debt service, you can see that in the budget book.
I noticed it goes down by the cost of about one school bus every year.
Don't get too excited over there. Not yet.
What did I press here? So health insurance costs, as you know, they keep going up and up and up. We're anticipating between 10 and 11% increase for next year. For our active employees for FY17, that was our cost. FY18, that was our cost for active. And then we have estimated costs for this year and estimated costs for next year. And then our retiree costs as well and what we're estimating. You see a little bit of a jump for FY20 due to the incentive and the number of people that will be going on to the retiree costs for FY20.
But I'll remind you, we were paying for them in the active employees, so
Right.
they've just shifted.
Right.
Does the district participate in the same collaborative that the town of Concord participates in?
Minuteman, absolutely.
Whatever it's called.
So also I wanted to show everyone our external funding sources. Again, it's not just the general fund, it's really not just grants and circuit breaker. But right now for the external funding for CPS, we rely on the grants, MECO, as well as the special ed circuit breaker. This is the actuals we received in FY18, what we're projecting for FY19, and what we're projecting for FY20. Again, we're a little conservative for our projections. The reason for that is the big increase to MECO this past year. We don't anticipate that to happen again. And also our special education tuitions are going down. So our costs would be down, but also our revenue for circuit breaker would go down. And this is at the CPS level. So in addition to the grants and other things, we have revolving accounts. So what this chart shows is a balance as of 7/1/2017, what each program in these revolving accounts or grants received, and the expenditures, and then the net balance. It's important to note is these are not stabilizations. These are not, other than maybe circuit breaker, but all of them can only be used for what they were raised for. So you can't just charge anything to these accounts. And again, this is the CPS funding. This is the external funding for the high school. As you know, we get a lot more revenue for the high school. Chapter 70, state funding. Chapter 71, which is regional transportation reimbursement. And then charter school reimbursement, which is low, but we also have an offset that we pay out. We receive some interest earnings. Interest rates are going up, so maybe that would help a little bit. And then as well, some miscellaneous revenue, some E-rate, and then any rental of school facilities, around 30,000.
How many town meetings we have?
We don't charge you.
So before we jump off that external funding CCHS, I just have some clarification question. In this revolving account for athletics, we have revenues of $306,000, but then under item 3510 athletics, we are spending another $728,000. is this in addition to the category 3510? It is in addition. So we're really spending about $1 million on athletics, just so, and that's really interscholastic athletics. That is not the gym. That's not like phys ed class. That's part of.
That's your
instruction.
varsity,
That's
junior varsity, all
Exactly.
It's after
your
school
It's that.
enrichment.
It's after school enrichment.
yeah,
Okay,
your
so
whole bandwidth of athletics at the high school. We do have one of the most
I,
broad and comprehensive programs, so
questioning
there's
that, but
positives to that. But
it's
Does that include transportation, or is that?
it does include
that number
transportation.
includes
If, for
transportation.
their travel
Yeah,
to and from
travel there.
games and
Okay.
things like
So
that.
it's
It's
not in
inclusive of everything that would be allocated to athletics.
And the revolver is the fees that families
fees,
pay
that's
for
it. Pay for the-
participation, and it doesn't include the monies that are spent by the various and sundry friends of
Correct,
programs.
June, correct.
or the car washes over at Crosby's.
Car wash, Handy Dandy, pizza parlor card,
Exactly.
all of it.
All of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of.
Which many of those organizations, if you pull their nonprofit statements, are spending substantial amounts of money
Yeah.
on some of the programs.
So, as I noted a few times, the appendices, we have the Mass State Chart of Accounts, we have the enrollment reports, also there's a glossary in there. I'm also taking suggestions on glossary items, if there's things that you don't understand and want to know in the budget booklet, please let me know. We
If we
wanna-
missed an acronym.
Yeah, we want to grow this glossary.
I'm still, inquiring minds want to know what IDEA stands for. It's not in there.
Oh, I didn't spell it out.
No.
I will. That is
Trying
my-
to, I don't want to be wrong, so I'm
Yeah.
not going to say
you don't
it's off the
know.
top of my head.
That's pretty fast.
So I welcome any questions.
Individuals with Disabilities Educational Act is what I would bet my money on, but I don't want to be wrong.
Sounds right. Maybe I can ask if you all have made a decision on ClearGov yet?
I'm waiting, so we were offered a better rate because they charge per district. So the initial numbers we heard from them were twice the regular fee, which turned into a pretty big number. So they've offered us some reduced fees with Carlisle, which was interesting. I'm waiting to hear from them, and once we know what they're doing, then we'll go back to them and settle up our numbers, and the committee will do a final decision once I can give them that number. So it's still on the radar.
So I just have a few, I read over these things. I have a few questions I would like to get a little more clarity on. In the hardware numbers, and I'm trying to see which one of these books I got it from. I suspect I got it from CCHS, but we'll see. Hold on one second while I go back to the detail. Basically, there's three categories of things that we use to educate our kids. We have textbooks, we have equipment, we have software, and then we have kind of other. I'm trying to find those instructional. So there we have textbooks. I'm going to skip the library because that's the library. We have instructional equipment, general classrooms, and other instructional services. Then we have instructional hardware. So the biggest ticket item, I think I'm in the CCHS book, $375,000 in FY17, 361 in FY18 adopted. It was transferred to become a lower number somehow, quite a bit lower, but that's neither here nor there. So basically, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on computers. But then, when you look at instructional software, we literally have $1,500. So I don't know how we have all this hardware, but we don't have any software.
What we do, so we definitely do.
It just doesn't make any sense.
That
Another area that
has
they're correcting.
been that has been one of our biggest projects this fall, is to identify where the software is being charged to. Much of it's out at the high school, much of it's out in the departments. We needed a master map as to how those were going to be tracked. DESI's just updated their lines to give us better guidance. I will say this is not an uncommon problem. Districts are all struggling with reining that into one place because as technology becomes more available, the purchasing might be made by a department level or might be made by, say, Kristen Herbert's office at an upper level, and then it ends up splintered throughout the budget. So the goal we have is to put it all together so we can all see it in one place. We're also eliminating redundancies because in that growth, you can sometimes have multiple things that do multiple software pieces that do similar things, and trying to, for FY20, be sure it's better reflected because your point is spot on.
So this leads me to a different question. Okay, in the bad old days, you bought a set of textbooks to teach a subject, and yeah, they became outdated. You know, the Soviet Union was no longer a thing, so maybe your geography, book became really crazy because now it's Russia and a bunch of other countries, and now it's out of date. And so you think, okay, I got to update my textbook, but then I can go another 10 years on this book.
Right.
We're now moving towards an educational delivery system where these are services, where you have to pay for the curriculum every year. It's not even necessarily that you're buying some software that you can just sort of coast with, that you can just say, okay, we're going to use it for 5 or maybe in 7 and just let it run. If you don't pay, you can't teach the next year. So it's a new model where you're pay as you go. And I'm just wondering how our districts are dealing
Yeah.
with this.
I had this conversation this morning with a couple of people. So the publishers are trying to stay ahead of this, right? Because for them, their profit is at stake. So the way they've many times have tried to structure it is that we can sign on for a 3-year subscription or a 6-year subscription. We've become of the mindset 6 years actually is violation of procurement law because 3 years is typically it. But then they price entice you that if you want it, they do offer an annual subscription, but often it's more costly than to sign on for 3 years. So we generally go to battle with the publishers to try to figure out how we get some wiggle room there and how, if we get wiggle room, if we don't, we have a different funding process. We've got to try to strategize because if it's a 3-year subscription and we have to pay it up front, then the line shouldn't have to carry it for the 2 years after, but you can't lose track of it for the 3rd. So this is exactly the conversation we had this morning. My answer to them was to beat up the publisher before we did anything. So every district's trying to figure this out. The publishers have tried to get ahead of it, and that's been their strategy.
I sort of feel like we're over a barrel. We've decided to go all in with technology, and now we're going to be in a pay-as-you-go model to use the technology because the platform.
I think we're making thoughtful decisions about
I'm not
that.
saying you're not. I'm
Yeah.
not implying that you're not making
Yeah.
thoughtful decisions. I'm just saying that the capacity to, it's like your cable bill. I want to watch TV, and all of a sudden my cable bill is $200 a month, and why am I paying $200 a month to watch the 3 channels I like to watch? Whatever. So these things happen to us all. We have cell phone bills where somehow our data plan becomes a lot. It's not uncommon in our culture that we get locked into these things, but we're just seeing this. This is kind of new for schools to have to be in this model where you're paying it.
Before you had consumables, you had to buy the workbook.
The workbook.
So I used to work in textbook publishing.
Okay.
And so going back to the early 80s and before then, the textbook industry is in orderly oligopoly, and they're spending a lot on program development. And they've got their financial analysts figuring out how they're going to recover that cost of putting together the curriculum, and whether you're buying a hard book and the consumables every year, or you're going to have to, pay for the subscription every year. They're going to recover the costs that they put into designing all the work they put into the writing and the publishing of the book.
What I think becomes intriguing with the technology, there's so much available now without a textbook that there are pockets of districts or in isolated ways, certain courses to start with. They might be able to build a whole course in Google Classroom with primary sources off the internet and not need the textbook. So I think eventually there's different decisions and choices to make. I think in the transition, you're not wrong, though. Yeah.
I think Northeastern University is moving to a model where they're trying to eliminate the cost of their students completely for purchasing textbooks using open source models.
So there we go. Wow, it's a big project. Yeah.
It might be worth it.
It
We'll
worth
figure
it.
out
I
the
agree.
cost.
I agree. Yeah. Yep.
See, I think that's all my questions. Oh, I had one more, hold on. I don't know if I can find it quickly. I think this is on the elementary school population model. It's in an appendix, so I have to get there. Here we go, I think I've got it.
What page are you on?
I think I'm in the NESDEC
Yep.
green thing. Okay. Now, this is on, there's a page that looks very much like the one I just showed you, which is historical, but then if you go one more, it's enrollment projection by grade. So, we are being projected from 19 to 20 to go up by 30 students in the elementary, at the elementary level. That seems like there's gonna need to be a head count of 2 or something like that. Is that likely?
So it all depends on how they're dispersed. If they disperse themselves equally, which would be the best, or actually if they'd go to Willard, that'd be best because that's where our low numbers are. It all depends, and if they cluster in a certain spot, that can be something we have to watch. If they all went to one building, that'd be something we had to watch. We're fairly maxed out for space, so that's the other side of that coin. Is that we see that we need to watch them, and up until now, stable has been the pattern. 30, I tend to say we can absorb. Probably less likely if they go all to Alcott than to Willard, but overall, we definitely can. The numbers I'm watching, Dean, we have a 70 student discrepancy between the Willard school right now and Alcott, so that's going to be something we have to keep an eye on and potentially make decisions about. So,
All right. Thank you. Those are mine. Anyone else have any questions for our guests?
I do. I have some questions on the OPEB. So the OPEB are there 2 pieces? Is there a piece for CCHS and then the town, and then the elementary school has none? I couldn't figure that out.
So the regional, we're responsible for it.
Okay.
So every employee who's hired governmental, you pay other post-employment benefits.
Right.
So the K through 8 side is paid through the Concord town.
Okay, so that's with the town.
Yeah,
Those-
town.
But so you have your own numbers.
Correct.
So have you gotten an estimate of what the liability is?
We do.
Liability?
So that is in the book. We have an actuary every single year.
Right, well, that's the arc, right? So what's the liability? What's the big number?
Once we get to 2038, that's how far they go out. If we keep our ARC at, the ARC going to keep growing, 1.872 million.
Right,
We will
I
no
know.
longer be paying the pay go.
Right, but what's the liability? What are you gonna put on
Oh.
the balance sheet?
That's, I know we have that. I do not have that offhand. It's in the,
It's changing every year with the valuations, and it's going to change again in about 2 months. But it's about $12 to $13 million. Total.
And it takes how long to pay it off?
it would take another 20 years to get to the pay go amount.
At the 800,000 and then the number that's in the charts?
Correct.
And what is the discount rate that they're using?
That is, it's actually it's in the low 6s. I'd have to go back and look, but it's actually pretty low.
I thought it was 7 or 7.
That's pretty low, you think?
Yes,
Yeah.
for the returns. A lot of districts are using 7.5.
Really?
Towns use it 7.
We think we're at 7.25 between Todd and I.
Yeah.
But that's just,
The district's
my
actually
money
lower
to
than
you.
the town.
okay, that's the town number, so there's a
Like it
separate
makes
number
sense.
for the district,
And
you're
a
saying?
half.
Yep.
Okay.
Ooh, interesting. You're on special economy.
Our own little world in our district.
And then how is it, what is it that they're getting? What's in the deal? And is it part of the contract that gets negotiated for you, for your teachers, I guess? And your
Sure,
staff?
it's just part of the package as a government employee.
So
that you-
every
you
government employee gets
Yeah,
something?
yes.
the region follows suit to whatever
So
the
this is a
town
Massachusetts
is.
thing, or
It's
a
a
town?
I
Concord.
think it's a Massachusetts.
Well, the
thing.
Massachusetts. So Massachusetts decides what the OPEB benefits are?
Well, yes, it does.
Okay.
And it puts it, it's a liability that's now going to be on the GASB.
Yeah.
So
Right.
now it's part of our It will affect our,
Right,
our
and what-
Moody
and-
rating and everything.
Right, and what is the benefit? So is it all healthcare, full healthcare? paid for?
Healthcare, correct, yeah.
Till you die?
Well, you do get
They
to
don't
go
pay
on to
for
Medicare.
Medicare.
Yeah, usually
Yeah.
So
Medicare.
at 65,
Right,
Usually,
yeah.
you have a flip over, so it's maybe 5 to 10 years or so?
Till 60, is it 65? Yeah.
65 Medicare starts, right? Isn't it?
And
Is it stopped?
Full is 60.
So at 65, you go on Medicare, but you'll still be eligible for supplemental plans depending
Okay.
on actually when you joined, came into the district,
Right.
because that determines some Medicare eligibility.
Right,
So it
okay.
covers the supplemental.
Yes, yeah.
So
Which is a
whatever
lot less expensive than a full health insurance.
Right, okay. So whatever the state decides is what Concord has to
As far as
do.
I'm aware, and I'm not an expert on this at all, but I've asked the same question, Christine, I've asked the same question, like, why, can we start to tail away from this
Correct.
offer?
Right.
And the answer is no, we can't, it's a government mandate. We have to, as a governmental entity, we have to provide post-employment benefits.
Now the expert.
Carrie might be able to answer that.
Just
Yeah,
a
there we
point,
go.
just a
Here's-
point of clarification. Each town in the Commonwealth makes its own decision whether or not it will provide retiree health insurance. Yes.
Okay.
And so that decision was made in the town of Concord at some point in the past, probably in the 50s or the 60s.
Right.
But that it is a local decision. There are actually
Okay.
towns that have elected not to provide retiree health insurance, and people don't retire from there. They go other places.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, because it's, I think that's important. I
I
think
know
we
it.
have to understand that and look at that,
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's a very significant liability.
It is.
Yeah? I mean, it's a good benefit, but it's a big liability
It is.
for the town. Okay, thank you.
I have a short question. I have a question about the adult ed revolving account. I know that's a really small amount, but it's an important service for a lot of adults and seniors in Concord. And I'm realizing that, I'm looking at the numbers, and it looks like we lost money in 2018, and the balance is going down. So who's watching that, and why, how are we gonna stabilize?
The goal is they break even, so we don't see that there's any jeopardy there.
There's been replacement of the driver's ed vehicles.
Okay,
So that was a big driver
Okay.
last year, but it is, it's something that would keep an eye on.
Okay. So you
In
think it's
fact,
gonna,
you know, Jill, when she builds her programs, she goes in knowing that she's gotta have a viable program.
Got it.
So,
So
and
it's
I
not
think
ju-
it's a really healthy, thriving program right now, given
Okay.
the participation rate. So,
good, okay.
cost
It
neutral,
wasn't
that's
for
the
this
goal.
year, that's
Yeah.
what I'm
Thank you,
wondering.
yeah, no, it's a good question.
You answered that.
Any questions from the public for our school representatives? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I got one last question.
Lori, one last question. John's jumping in at the end.
Go ahead, Tom.
Has the new SRO started?
Yes. Kevin Gina. He started Monday. What a gem he is already. So really excited. Thank you.
Sure, we're gonna bring that up,
Yeah.
since we all voted against it.
Yeah. Don and Patty over here.
No.
Yes.
Wait, don't we get to veto this?
So I'm still working through the paperwork, but I started trying to understand this, but I don't know. But I don't know.
It drills on you.
You don't move to June.
Last week she gave us a big spreadsheet, which
Good night, thank you.
developed the guideline based upon the amount of levy, if that's what we want, and that might be the way we go at it. Exactly. Exactly. So if you want to keep the levy we have now and our levies, then the three entities says it would be this much for, and so.
Traveling a lot starting in January, but I can, for the most part, I can plan my schedule tight. Not every time that's not possible.
Okay.
I'm gonna run us through your model again.
Thank you, but for the supplement.
So this
I
time we
was,
might understand.
sadly, I was not here last week when you did it. I would love to see it when we. It's always something we can do last week's model.
I think it would be good for everybody. So that's a lot of.
Here we go.
Matriculate someplace in the States, or is that unknown?
He wants to go to
So did you get what Chris gave out?
That's his number one
I got it on
and
email.
he's a big.
And I haven't really.
Well, that's, good for you, good for you.
Unexpected.
He wants.
That is, and technically, he's, I guess, retired. Well, I just think temporarily retired.
That's what he's asking for.
On sabbatical.
That is salary reserve.
Yeah.
It's only for
Salary
My
reserve.
husband passed away, my kids.
And this is the number that Carrie
Oh, 3
generated
years.
that he could go up to if we keep our levy.
So we had some
Unused levy capacity, and I think it's 4.6%.
Oh, we're gonna absolutely.
Exactly,
No
exactly.
question.
Right. Or raise taxes more than we
And I
used
really
to.
didn't.
even as time
So
goes by.
that's what she was.
All right, I need some, can we come back to order here? We still have a few agenda items.
Let's do that. So we can watch the Red Sox.
Sorry, we're still.
Some of us-
Yes, I understand, but yes, we're still meeting.
I
Doesn't work, it just sounds kind of nasty. Bring the hammer down.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah, I need a wine glass.
You should have a gavel.
Richard, we're still meeting.
Yeah,
We need to,
we need to keep moving, okay? All right, everybody? Okay, so the next item on our agenda is further discussion of FY '20 preliminary guideline, and Carrie's put up her model again. So I was not here last week, but I know that we are trying to, keep our levy capacity from being eroded. One of the things that we've seen in the 5-year modeling has been that our levy capacity will be exhausted sooner rather than later, and it just depends on how much we're eating into it each year. So that's one of the things I think we need to be very cautious about, because once we hit that, we'll be talking to the town about overrides and the rest of that. So we have to be very careful. So Carrie, can you just take us through this, because I would love to just understand how you arrive at some of these numbers. I see a number up there, 3.11, and yet last week Chris looked for an operating increase of 8.27. So that's a big change. There's a big difference from that. So
Okay, so the, at your next meeting, which is your
regular
monthly
meeting, yeah.
regular meeting of the Finance Committee, you will be tasked with coming up with the preliminary guideline for fiscal '20. Obviously, you have fairly limited information because Minuteman was before you, and they presented sort of on a conceptual basis what they were looking at. Tonight, we heard really a conceptual basis, and as you mentioned, you did hear from the town manager last week, but that really is just a compilation of all of the requests that were submitted, not prioritized. So, that's really the only hard number you have, and it's pretty. It is
10% last year.
It is, but it's still a fairly soft number, because obviously that nobody has any intention or any thought that you would come anywhere close to funding anything like that. So what I do at this point is look through all of our revenues and come up with a revenue estimate, and then I also come up with a fixed cost estimate, which is the non-guidelines portion of the budget, and the difference between the projected available revenue and the projected fixed cost is what is available for guidelines. And guidelines for the newer members are what you would be divvying up between the two schools and the town. So
Why do we have this other bucket that sort of can grow at whatever, doesn't have guidelines? Why does that part get to grow? So I understand the debt piece.
yeah,
But there's also the OPEB
The-
for the town in there, right?
right. The fixed costs are the insurances, the employee benefits, and the debt service. They're taken the way that the process is set up, and I'd really have to go back and look to see whether it's bylaw. I think it is included in bylaw that those fixed costs are not part of the purview of the finance committee.
But we look at the end
It's
number
going
of
to
the
be in that
tax.
bucket.
We look at what the tax
Tax
rate is,
effect,
what
yeah.
the tax effect
Yeah.
will
And
be,
so that's
and that
really,
informs how we
work
would
that
then
back,
push
yeah.
back against the operating budgets.
Yeah.
I think the thought is, obviously, the debt service is fixed
Yeah.
and the projects are voted on by town meeting.
Yeah.
The employee benefits really are, in terms of the percentage split between the employer and employee, those are fixed. And they're not something that fluctuates on a regular basis. So obviously, the cost of the premium does, but the share does not. And as has been mentioned before, the town and the district are, and the town of Carlisle as well as the other part of the district, the employer share of the health benefits is on the very low end. The minimum that a town as an employer can contribute is 50%, and you can go up to as high as what you want. And we are at between 55 and 63%, depending on whether you're on a single plan or a family plan, and depending on the type of plan that you're on.
I think it's a strange exclusion.
Who's responsible for negotiating the cost of healthcare?
The health insurance is negotiated within individual bargaining agreements, but the process that we use in the town is all of the unions come together collectively and bargain them on an informal basis.
Is that the basis of your question, or were you talking about the actual
The purchasing,
purchasing the
I guess I'm
insurance?
talking about the actual purchasing and negotiating with the carriers. for
Oh,
the
okay,
types
so
of-
that
for
we-
the types of plans.
We purchase through the Minuteman Neshoba Health Group, which is a collaboration of 16 different towns in the area, and that's where we're getting our health insurance from.
And the exclusion is about $1 million. It's 600 for insurance, 100 for OPEB, 200 for pension. I think there's, that's it, about 900,000 or so. That's the number that's out, I think, if I added it up
For-
right. Does that make sense?
For,
And I looked at the categories that are excluded,
yeah,
so that's what it looked like to me.
not 900,000, no. That's,
It has insurance for 600,000, no?
so if you look here in this column, so for group insurance for the town and CPS, 5.966 million is the estimate for fiscal 20.
Oh, yeah, the change, so it's the.
Oh, okay,
it's the
so you were
change. I'm
looking at-
the
yeah.
change. Right, so the excluded change, if you will, is around $1 million, it's around $900,000, I think, when I added up those things, so that's what I was looking at. It's about
Okay.
4.5% growth compared to, that revenue growth of what it is, it's around 3.1% or 3.3%. So it's growing faster than revenue, even though it's, just as a percent.
Yes, and that certainly is not particular to the town of
Right.
Concord.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Carrie, are these the same numbers you showed us last week?
They are. So as I mentioned last week, the place that I started is the same place that I started last year, with the assumption that, let's see, I'll go down here. that you would be looking to maintain the same percentage of unused levy capacity at 4.54%. So I made the assumption that we would use property taxes, an amount that reserved 4.54% of the levy capacity. That is actually, when I calculated that out, if you took the allowable 2.5% growth in the levy plus the new growth, the amount that would be available under this scenario is slightly lower than that. So they were roughly equivalent, I think about $150,000 difference, with this number being lower than the other number. So that's the starting point for property taxes.
What is the debt exclusion that gets added back? What is that about?
So that is for debt that the voters have specifically authorized to be outside of Proposition 2.5. So we raise whatever is required to service that debt until the debt has been
So that doesn't
paid.
affect the unused levy capacity.
It doesn't affect the unused levy capacity, right? So then we factor in estimates for state aid, for local receipts, and for available funds. State aid, Jared had mentioned when the governor's budget is expected to come out January 23rd. The state is on a timetable that really doesn't work well with us and our process here. You know, you will have voted your final guideline November 30th or shortly before November 30th, issued it. The state won't begin talking about fiscal 20 until mid-December. The governor will issue his budget at the end of January, and there's not a whole lot of conversation that occurs until we're just before our annual town meeting. So the estimate that I have plugged in is a 2% increase. We might, as we get closer to town meeting, when you take your last look at the guidelines in March, we likely will have a better idea of what's happening at the state level. We could plug those new numbers in, but typically what you would do is you would just be reducing your draw on property taxes at that point in time. You're not necessarily looking to add anything to the budget, just to change up how we're going to fund the budget. For local receipts, last week we talked about the fact that we're seeing some growth in our room occupancy tax. That's the tax levied on hotel rooms, and our meals tax, jet fuel excise, and motor vehicle is not a whole lot of growth there. What we do is we're pretty early in the fiscal year, so we'll get we only have our, I don't think we completely have our September receipts posted at this point in time. We're pretty close to having that done. But when we take a look at this again next month, we'll have a little better of an idea and maybe can make some slight adjustments. I don't think we're going to make big adjustments here, but maybe, if we can find or are comfortable with projecting another 100,000 or so, we certainly would be adding that in.
We don't tax for things like Airbnb or,
I don't think we allow Airbnb.
So
do we not? I didn't know that.
I asked this question last meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe we got an answer, I don't know.
Right.
You can rent places on Airbnb.
Yeah,
I know that you can.
you can.
So I went back and I looked at the enabling legislation for the rooms occupancy tax, and I think it really depends on how Airbnb, how it's rented. And I'm not knowledgeable enough to say whether or not we allow it or we don't allow it in town. That's something I'd have to go back and. So we're not
allowed.
Okay.
We
So
send
just.
out letters when we see the advertisements notifying the people that it's illegal.
So just from a philosophical point of view, then it really depends on whether if you're renting for more than a week. I think the current law probably would require you to pay a room occupancy tax, but if you're doing on a nightly basis, that's not something that's anticipated in that law. But there was legislation that was filed, and I believe it was approved and is with the governor right now to make that applicable to Airbnb and other similar types of rentals.
Thank you.
So then available funds, right now we are looking at including $1 million to reduce property taxes. This would come from free cash. I do think that we have the ability to do that, but we certainly are tapping into our free cash. I think we probably would be at about 8.5% to 9%, which is perfectly fine. You heard Jared mention that the rating agency is saying 3.5% for E&D. They certainly wouldn't say 3.5% for the town of Concord, but we have a policy of 5 to 10%, and I don't think there's anything wrong with 8.5%. We certainly wouldn't want to go a whole lot lower than that, or we probably would hear from Moody's wondering what was going on. Did you?
The subject of the free cash, and it's been used in the past to establish stabilization funds for particular capital, excluded debt projects. And we were just talking tonight about the middle school, which is $70 million. That's what the feasibility study came up with. So would it, how do I put this? I mean, would it behoove the town to somehow, get that free cash, back to where it was a couple of years ago, where there might be enough to put into a stabilization fund? I guess that's, it's an open question. I don't, expect that.
So we have basically two buckets of reserves. We have free cash and we have stabilization funds. Free cash can be appropriated by a vote of town meeting by a simple majority. Stabilization funds can be appropriated by town meeting by a 2/3 majority. From a rating agency perspective, they're combining all of our unrestricted fund balance, and they're looking at it from that perspective. So they don't care if it's free cash or it's a stabilization fund. From a on the other side of the coin, if you're, maybe I should back up and say, it really depends town to town how the town views those reserves and what hurdle it wants to go over to be able to expend those reserves. So you may find a town that looks very similar to the town of Concord, and they have $10 million in stabilization funds where we have $10 million in reserves. And that's really, in free cash, that's really just the philosophy of the town. Does it make sense to start a new stabilization fund and move free cash, either existing free cash or consciously try to create more free cash? Certainly from a rating agency perspective, it doesn't matter. That's really a local decision that the town would want to make.
So when you say a simple majority vote, that would be to take it from free cash and put it into a state. But if we didn't do that and we wanted to have a stabilization fund, we would have to do a 2/3 vote to be able to take it from taxes, basically, to levy taxes to do that?
A 2/3 vote is required to take money out of a stabilization fund to appropriate it for a purpose.
Oh, okay.
Whereas free cash, you can take it out and appropriate it by a simple majority. So I think another thing to take into account is if we were to create another stabilization fund for a middle school and we were taking money from free cash, the intention would be that you would be using it at some point in time. And so you would be depleting your overall fund balance, and that would have an impact on, a potential impact on your rating.
I think the implication of Carl's question is, should we be auguring as a town to just build up some sort of additional reserves, you know, on top of our normal management of free cash, some additional reserves for the obvious need that we will have in the not too distant future to pay down a new middle school, the debt of a new middle school.
Which is something the town has done in the
We've done,
past.
Tony's
Yeah.
done it, we've
Yeah.
had stabilization funds each time we
And
built
now
a
it is-
school. We would just sort of chop the top of the highest part of the debt curve, you know, the debt service curve, by just, and we would appropriate it, just like you say, we'd have to appropriate it at
Yeah.
town meeting. You know, we're gonna take this out of a stabilization fund to, you know, reduce the tax levy, you know, on this debt service.
So is the thought that maybe you wouldn't want to include $1 million to reduce the property tax in fiscal 20? I mean, I think that's a good discussion to have here.
I mean, I just think that we're up against it. We're gonna be,
Yeah, we
we're
are
gonna
going.
have a middle school
Yeah.
construction project in the next 3 to 5 years, and we need to start just putting
Sooner
our
the better.
acorns away.
That would start.
But I think you're not gonna have very much, left to, room to allocate to growth in the budget either.
That's right.
That's the
No,
problem.
no, no.
That's the
That's
punchline, that's the
exactly right.
punchline of what we're all looking at right now, is we're
There's no
looking at a
room.
very difficult year.
Exactly.
And if it keeps on going, we're gonna eat up that levy limit
Well,
capacity.
if the $1 million is removed as a source to support this budget, it means that, and we go with the assumption that we're looking at, no, that's not gonna work. Forget it, I'm gonna stop what I was
Well,
saying.
you could, it would just mean even less growth.
It would mean, right, less growth or less unused levy capacity.
Yep.
So I have a question of slightly different matter. One baseline figure that I would find extremely useful in our discussion of setting our guideline for this year is the increase in budget that we are obligated to make. So if we decide that we're going to be level serviced in the government, what increase are we obligated to make to meet the increases to all of our personnel, for instance, in their lines and steps or whatever that term is,
And commitments like cap of the debt payment, I agree, there's a fixed
Or any
number.
other
We
contractual
already
way.
know, there's
So
a number
what-
we already know we have to spend. What is
Yes.
that number?
So what is the known increase that we have to meet? Is it 1%? Is it 2%? But that to me is a very interesting number to use as a starting point to set our guideline.
Yeah, and so the difficult thing is, I don't have that for CPS or for the district, and I'm not sure they have it at this point in their development process. I think we could come pretty close with the town, because most of the required increase would be just in that salary reserve account that the manager presented to you, which I know it was about $1 million, but I think that's, I would want to go back and look at that number again.
And as Jared said, in both CPS and CCHS, it's salaries are 80% of their budget.
Right.
So I think they would be able to provide us with those figures, and even if they're not accurate down to the last $1,000, they would be extremely useful to know that.
I certainly can ask and see if we can get that information for next week.
You could ballpark it, because the collective bargaining agreement,
Yeah.
percentage increases were
Very easy
listed,
to
they're listed in
estimate
the chart, you know.
Yeah.
Right now, it is not hard to figure that out.
No, I
I
wouldn't
was
think
doing
so.
it on the back of the envelope, I was sitting there,
Right.
it's at least
So,
$1 million.
whether you ask or I ask or we both ask, I think we ought to ask them.
We've spent a lot of money and spent down
no.
E&D for all their catch-up.
John pointed out something to me
Last time.
this morning, right? That the debt service, especially for the schools, is for the next few years
It's down.
going down. So that, you know, gives us some flexibility or some relief from having to increase the tax. It doesn't affect the guideline, but it does provide some.
But you had a
money.
stabilization
So that
reserve.
was-
and
the
that-
school-
now it's
That was
gone.
specifically for the district.
Right.
For the
yeah.
region, but when the region, you know, I think it's a good time to introduce the concept, particularly at the region, that there's operating budget should be thought about X, the debt service on the new building, and that, you know, one use of that delta could be that the town of Concord's share, 75% share of that the taxpayers would prefer to put it in a middle school stabilization fund than let the region spend on growth on something else.
Mhm.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yep.
That thinking that this is a permanent allocation to the region and that they're free to spend it,
No.
that introducing that as a concept, that it's, you know, a taxpayer dollar, and that for Concord, it may make more sense for the money to be going towards the middle school or some of these other pressing issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not that, you know, as a concept.
You got my vote.
All right, so we pointed out that we have no high school debt stabilization fund.
Right.
Really, middle school stabilization fund that
Yeah,
Create
but
or
we've
something.
tapped out what we have for the high school.
yeah, we're done with that,
Yeah.
yep.
So for the,
They're allocated for a particular thing anyway.
Yeah.
Well, that was only our towns, I mean, we in Carlisle have our own discrete debt service payoff mechanisms, I believe. So we have a stabilization fund, they could just pay it out of current funds, they don't necessarily have to do what we've done, but.
That's right.
so for fixed costs, we had talked last week about the group health insurance. I'm projecting 11%. I think you heard the district say 10 to 11% increase. The OPEB and retirement assessments are based on our valuations, meeting the ARC that is identified in both of those most recent valuations. And then we have insurances, unemployment, workers' comp, property and liability. Those are based on, you know, it's very early. If anybody's involved in projecting insurance, you're not going to get somebody to give you, you know, much more than a couple of months in advance what the renewal will be for those particular insurances. So those numbers might be a little high, and we certainly can work to bring those down. The Minuteman Regional High School assessment, I do expect, based on the presentation, an increase of, it came out to $100,000. If you were here for that presentation, you heard that the assessment is based on a 4-year rolling average enrollment, and some of the lower enrollment years are coming off, and we've had increasing enrollment there. So I think, based on my rough calculation, the increase in enrollment would be 2.25 students, and that's approximately $100,000.
Do you have any sense, I mean, the takeaway for me was a little bit opaque, was that there are certain towns that are removing themselves from that district, and that leaves the remaining towns with the debt service requirement for the building. So there's a capital assessment that we will get. Is that also going to be included in the number that you're
The member towns pay the capital assessment is for non-member towns.
Or whatever,
But the
we're
debt
pay-
service is
but
in
the
that-
debt service for the building is now being borne by a smaller number of towns, is what I guess, that's my.
Yes.
So that goes into the regular assessment, though.
Does that go
That is
into our
part-
regular
Comes out.
assessment? That's part of our per-student assessment, includes a capital component, I think.
Yes, it includes, but we do separate it out because the debt service associated with that project is exempt. So you'll see line 9 up there is the operating assessment, and then 11B is the debt assessment.
Oh, there we go. So it's really a,
And I've just plugged that in. I don't have any information from them yet. So, but whatever that number is, it also gets added up top to the property tax exempt debt to be raised amount. So then the only other piece of the fixed costs that we haven't talked about would be the state assessments, the snow and ice deficit, and the overlay account. So the state assessments and offsets, the assessments are charges that the state levies upon us for services that the state provides, and the largest is for MBTA. State offsets, those are monies that come to the town for specific purposes, so they're included in the revenue line, and they're taken out again in the assessments, and that's mostly for libraries. The library gets about $20,000 a year for that can be directly expended by the library for certain types of activities. The snow and ice deficit, this is an allowance for an overage in the fiscal 19 snow and ice account if it so exists and can't be accommodated within the appropriation for fiscal 19. And then the overlay, this is the account that we fund to pay any abatements or exemptions that are granted by the Board of Assessors. So the total fixed or non-guideline accounts are $25.9 million. That's an increase of $1.125 million. And that would leave $2,182,724 available for growth in the operating budgets for fiscal 20, which is a 2.67% increase. And then last week we talked about that translates to a 2.44% increase in property tax to the existing base.
Forgive my forgetting the exact terminology, but in terms of property tax abatements, where will we account for the reduction in taxes to people who apply for and receive this?
The senior means.
CFC.
Yeah. So that, and we had a nice presentation from the Board of Assessors at the Select Board meeting on Monday night about this. I want to say the amount, we had 49 or 51 people who qualified for the senior means tax exemption. I think the total amount to be exempted was $180,000 or so.
I think it was a total of 197.
197,
Yeah,
thank you.
Or 49.
40.
That's 3 cents, is that right?
Correct, but 3 cents, they even it down, so if it's 3.3, it becomes 3, so that there is a little bit of a gap on that,
Is that
but
in your?
they're saying 3 cents.
So that activity will occur outside, for the most part, will occur outside of the overlay. It does result in about 3 cents. With the 3 cents, there was the 3 cent differential doesn't quite raise the full amount. So we could either go to 4 cents, or the difference, if we stayed at 3, the difference could come out of the overlay account, and that's probably.
Where does that show up in
Is
that?
it in here though, somewhere? No, it doesn't get
It's-
assumed in your number, or?
No, because that is just going to be shifted. It's going to be shifted from, it doesn't impact the total amount of taxes to be raised. It just shifts between the residential class that is receiving the exemption versus.
Stratify the rate, I got
Yeah.
it.
So the only impact will likely be just a slight hit to the overlay, so we don't have to go up to 4 cents, because then we would be raising more than we needed.
No, I had another question, or I had a question about the overlay. The numbers that 550 and so on that we budget,
Mm-hmm.
is that typically what we spend in that over the years?
It varies. It
Sure it does,
definitely,
yeah.
it definitely varies. We certainly, that's the amount we have been targeting for that particular account. I do think that bears some additional discussion about whether or not we need to have quite that much in that account.
Because it had built up,
Yeah, it had built up to,
unspent.
right, it
Yeah.
had built up to quite a large amount, and we ended up requesting town meeting appropriate $1.5 million from that account to bring it back down to, it's at $1 million or $1.2 million. And we do have some outstanding cases, so, yeah.
Great. It's not that I have oodles of spare time and I'm itching to get my fingers on it, but if you could circulate this.
I did, but it was later. It was later today.
Oh, today?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
okay.
was.
I-
It's really, there's a lot of information.
Okay.
That whole
Yeah.
write-up.
So compared to prior years, since I'm new, is that a small number? Because that seems like a really small number to me. Given that I'm looking at 2 million, what's left to spend?
I don't think
Well,
it's,
even the number, $2.1 million is what the growth is limited to? Is that how I read it?
it's not unusually low, at least.
When we looked at the town budget last week, though, that was, that 2.67% increase was not enough to even meet the salary increase. So the town's operating budget's gonna have to, by my calculations, go by about 4% just to accommodate the salary.
But not all of that was contractually obligated.
Most of it was not. Yeah, most of it was not, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's 2 million.
Yeah.
So like, Tom's request
No,
of
that's
understanding
true.
what's the rock bottom.
The whole, for all
Yeah,
3
that's right.
entities, yeah.
Needed info.
And and you always have to juggle then that 4.5% to see
Well,
whether
what
you
ends
want
up-
to keep it or not. Okay.
You know, where the pressure comes in is how much of we want to dig into our levy limit capacity.
Right, okay.
And that's where the.
And I think last year, they also reduced the OPEB, right? Isn't that part of?
That was
the
in
high
the
school
district,
did
that was
not,
at the
The,
district.
the district does that, when they're having trouble meeting the
Right.
guideline.
That's another
Well,
thing
they
you're gonna
tuned
need
into
more
E and
reserves
D
on.
and
They
the
tuned into
OPEB, and the OPEB.
You worried about the middle school? I'm worried about that.
Yeah.
Those are big liabilities and they're not going away.
Well, they're not going away, and it is a statewide problem. It is
That's
a
okay.
huge
It is.
statewide problem.
But the people are gonna retire, they're gonna get sick, I mean, it's reality, right? So
It is reality.
we have to start funding that at better than 40 years. So that one really worries me. That's why I was pressing them on it.
There's another reality too, that, we've been tossing around for several years, and we've been trying to work on it, which is the fiscal sustainability question. And, will we have an opportunity to discuss that perhaps before we start doing the guidelines,
Well,
discussion?
I'll
Just as
I'll dive in here a little bit. Tom and I have had a conversation about the 5-year tax projection model that has been part of our
Yep,
thing that we do.
yep.
And Tom is trying to see if there's any way we could convert its purpose from just informing town meeting of based on what we're seeing, here's the band in which your taxes may grow. Okay, that's the stated purpose based on some warrant article from years ago. The town wants to know, as an informational piece, what our
The 5-year.
idea about
Yep.
tax growth is.
Yep.
And in Tom's, not to put too many words into your mouth, Tom, but Tom's goal would be to use it to help us build some sort of guardrails, like to help us as a FinCom to establish our own guideline. Whereas it's really been an after the fact exercise. We establish our guideline, we plug all those numbers in, and then that drives the model.
Right.
So we would have to back up the use of that model to be part of the guidelines process. We have not done that this year. We'd have to probably take a deep breath and try to do it next year. We're probably not in a good position to use it this year, but we would have to really rethink how are we using that model, and what new inputs would that model require in order to become a tool for helping us establish guardrails in sustainability.
And I think, all along we've seen that as having that potential to be a very useful tool for that. The other thing, though, is to kind of look at the external piece of it, which is, basically, there's the cost of living increase.
Right.
Are we going, and we have we have the Randall curve, which shows that we're diverging from cost of living increases at a radical rate. And then there's also compensation increase, wage increase, and what are the trends
Right.
with that too? Because we actually, and we stated in our report, one of the things we look at is that our tax increases do not outstrip the expectations of people's income increases. That's right there in our report as a principle that we try to use. So it might be good to look at, we have the Randall curve. I don't know if
Well, we
Scott's-
did a lot of work last year too that we showed that we also really didn't have any meaningful change in the town population. So at the period that the expenses have been growing at a rate that vastly outstrips
Same number of
inflation,
people are
we've had
paying
the
for
same
it.
number of people in town, and so
paying for it.
there's a
Right.
what
And
have we been doing, and what's been happening in terms of the level of service, and like what are all the things that are driving it. We've been trying to steadily over the years chip away at understanding all of that, and we've also increased our reliance on excluded debt over the years. So there's a whole bunch of things that have been going on in terms of understanding all of that, and looking at what's happening with the average wage in town, with the goal.
So I've been looking at some of this. CPI is, wow. I took economics in college,
Yep.
which is, half a century ago. and I found out that it wasn't my field. But the CPI is very complex, and there's a lot, you can look at the numbers, but there's different CPIs and all that sort of stuff. But I think it would be something to look at. Hopefully Scott will be coming next week, because he's the one who's been sort of keeping track of that. But then there's the other thing is the wage and compensation, the Department of Labor statistics, or whatever it is, tracks. They track basically wage increases for everything: plumbers, electricians, doctors, everything. Get it all. But maybe we should have another Fizzywig meeting to try to see if we can get at something that might inform us on where that piece of it is going. Because if we keep on doing, I know that 4% increases are just, that's not the rate at which most wages are increasing. It's like you know,
Like,
2%.
I think they just announced the Social Security.
Oh, that's the other one, yeah, 1%.
2.8%.
Oh, 2.8, okay, well, it has been 1%, yeah. Yeah, I think, well, the wage increase is also going up a little bit above 2, but it was, you know, below 2. So I think, you know, we should, we'll try to bring some of that into the conversation, I would say.
Yeah, it might be appropriate to have the FYSIWIG, as you call it, discussion.
Fiscal Sustainability Working Group.
I got that. That discussion as a part of our regular meeting, rather
Yeah.
than having it as our
Yeah,
subcommittee.
but rather than waiting till after we've decided on the guideline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think we should, if we are planning to have that discussion as part of our regular meeting, we ought to be armed with some information.
Right.
That we're just sort of making reference to now, but we don't have the actual figures.
No.
So figures about the different applicable types of CPI would be good to have.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to look at is the compensation curves too, yeah.
For which,
Well, again, it's almost probably more complex than the CPI, because there's, you know, as I say, you've got everything.
But you're talking about Department of Labor statistics?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
I wondered whether you were talking about the baseline figures that I'm hoping Carrie can generate for us in cooperation with CPS and the district, so that we can know what our
Yep.
increases are, what our obligated increases are. Anything else anybody can think of that we ought to research before having this discussion?
Well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of item 3 on the agenda, and moving on, we have just general questions and comments. Anybody got anything further to add that's not necessarily on topic?
I do. I don't know if it's related. I mean,
That's fine, this is what this agenda item is for, so.
Well, I just was interested in the budget presentation that we just had, and the degree of perfection in budget versus actual. Having run lots of budget myself, that's stunning. They're within 0.5% of budget to actual. I've never seen that one done. Right? How do they achieve it? It's sort of interesting to me how that happens.
She was.
Nobody who ever worked for me achieved it.
So, it was Lori's first year, and she told us that she was signing off on all purchase requisitions. So, you know, there's very close watching, but not saying
There
that
is
this
some-
is what they did, but many governmental entities will spend what they're allocated.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm a little bit worried about when I saw it.
I mean, and that was probably my question,
Yeah.
was around the idea of zero-based budgeting and why there would be any increase, because in theory, the first year that zero-based budgeting is implemented, you typically see flat to down, has been my experience. So even with salary increases, there should be sufficient extra. So, you know, it's hard when they're not coming in with firm numbers.
I look at the number of schools that have actually used CBB, and there are varying circumstances, some under great duress, but that's been not out of the ordinary to have flat to down,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, especially some of the things she was mentioning, like going from, you know, an internal attorney to, if they're paying on average 1,000, I don't know how many hours a week.
They
or
don't down
expense.
the hours of sales.
Yeah, but I mean, at $1,000 an hour, you don't have to spend a lot of hours to get to a lot of money.
Right.
That's a change that's been a long time coming, that you're new to this committee, both of you, and this committee's been pounding the table for years. Please change your very high price, you know.
Especially one member who's not here.
Yeah.
Right, but if they were spending enough, I mean, a full-time person's what, about 200 hours a year? So 200 times 1,000 is a lot of money, and at least in my book. And so now that's just got chopped into a quarter, so
Yep.
and that's just one
So that's
role.
one of the outliers.
Tutoring, same thing, right? If reallocated tutoring, I mean, we should see, I mean, from what I heard, I
mean,
would think you'd
if-
see some significant savings on the salary side.
Yeah, it's 70, even just the outsourcing, right? The outsourcing of the education. Another website that I looked at in prepping for this meeting, Concord shows that it pays $70,000 a head when they give a kid to another special education place like Perkins, or they go outside, versus 14, it would be 14, but that's the average. I imagine it's higher if we start doing our own special education. But even if it was 20, that's a significant savings.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a really good idea. But I was struck by I came in right on budget.
I know.
Because that never happens.
I know, in real life.
It
And
does.
It seems like as the year comes to an end, if they see that they're underspent in some level, they overspend in another area.
Well, that's
So-
what I'm a little worried about.
Well,
But what happens if the school comes in over budget? Do they come to us for a reserve transfer? I mean, what
You
happens?
do,
not
yeah,
aware that we have
supplemental,
Yep.
yeah.
They have to go to the town meeting.
They go to the town meeting, right? That's what surprised me too, but anyway.
Yeah, so
And
that's
they
how-
always put a supplemental article and they usually don't move it, but there's always one in there in case there's some.
Not all.
So at least they didn't do that.
Yep, right, that's good.
I just, another thing that I think they are improving on tremendously, and that's been a problem, is that the line items in the budget have never really, they've been wildly divergent from the actual amounts that are spent. And,
Yes.
This is-
That's right.
and
Yeah,
and
for
so
new
they're-
people,
they're-
this is the cleanest we've ever seen.
Yeah.
This is, incredible improvement. And it's a massive project, which
Well, they're 2/3 of the guideline money is the schools, right?
But unlike the town, the school districts are allowed to move money between accounts under the direction of the superintendent. They don't have, with the town, the warrant has specific buckets for dollars in specific accounts, and you cannot move it as if you're underfunded in a given line item, you can't then say, oh, let's save money over here and put that in there. You just can't do it. So the school has a lot more budget flexibility in that regard, just because of the way laws are written. They're allowed to do it.
Yes. Do you think it's realistic to think that with the zero-based budgeting, that they'll come in with a very low, do you have a feel for that, Dean?
I don't have any specific feel for it.
What was your question, Mary?
With zero-based budgeting, do we think that their FY '20 budget will be less than their FY '19 budget? Less.
I wouldn't.
I think it's unlikely.
Take out salaries. Take out salaries.
Take out
salaries.
That's 80%
That's
of their
gotta be
budget.
80%.
That's 80% of their budget, and they're locked in at 2%. Where are you gonna find?
And it's
all
not
that?
really 2% because of the steps and lanes.
It
That's more than that when you add the benefits, right?
Well,
So, we'll,
It
we're
has to
rooting
be-
for it.
yeah, it seems unlikely.
I mean, they might be able to, I don't know what they're doing on the software side, but if it's subscription-based, there's typically, I don't know if they do any kind of audit of user access auditing, because that can cut out serious dollars. And if they are duplicating software in different departments, we saw that was a huge savings when that got consolidated.
Yeah.
But that has to be done in time, and that can actually take.
The school bus routing discussion was a good one, I thought, because that sounds like they're gonna squeeze out some capacity, excess capacity from what they have on the school bus cost, which is a couple $1 million there too, so that could be something.
As we've talked about with the schools, the 80% of it is salaries. To me, it's all about the negotiations. That's where the money is, right? The rest is not, it doesn't amount to a lot, right? They may save a little bit here and there, and that's great, and they're obviously working hard on doing that. But it's the negotiations are the key to the costs at the school, and that's what drives it. So I think the pressure that we put on them in that regard is going to make the most difference of anything, by far. And the more we can give them a target, I think the more it's going to arm the school committee when they go into these negotiations to hold a firm line.
So this underscores the importance of the guardrail principle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. I agree wholeheartedly.
And looking long-term,
Right.
5, 10 years maybe, you know, obviously farther than that, it's very sketchy, but.
Yeah, because the contracts are 3 years, so they negotiate them, and then they come and say, these are the costs. We have these costs, and now we're trying to build a guideline around those costs with those percentages built in, instead of saying, over the next 3 years, here's what the guardrail looks like.
Right, yep.
So when you go negotiate, take this into context.
And if you can't change the price, because the negotiate, I mean, at 2% or 2.5%, that's not an unreasonable rate, I don't think, necessarily, then it's gonna come back to programs. It's one or the other, right? So if you have this many teachers for these many programs, and you only have so much to spend, then it's, and if 2% is gonna be what the unions demand, and that's what you negotiate, then it's gonna come back to programs.
But it really
So
isn't
it's one or the
2%.
other. Okay, it's higher than that, right? Right.
There are various ways that it's not 2%.
Yeah. Any public comment? Oh, the public.
I would have, I guess, 2 points. One is that at the chair's breakfast yesterday
Would
morning,
you identify yourself, please? sir?
Tom, Select Board. At the chair's breakfast yesterday morning, Carrie Flood, who is our liaison to the Minuteman Tech, stated that it is coming on budget, on time, and that there is a possibility that Watertown may join the group, the coalition. And if that happens, she thinks that it's also likely that Belmont may come in as well. So that may affect some of the numbers. The other point I would make is next select board meeting, we are going to have a report from the Affordable Housing Funding Committee. One of their possible sources of funding may be free cash. So there's a very vocal group who are pushing for affordable housing. So I think that there's going to be kind of a need for education. The concept of free cash, I think, is kind of a wrong terminology. And I wish people could come up with another term.
Can I just add to that? I've been observing the Affordable Housing Fund, and they've actually drafted a report, and I'm happy to report that free cash is not one of their top
Okay.
3 recommendations.
Oh, good, okay. Because
And
it was one.
It
at an
was,
earlier
and
point.
yes, and every time they
Yeah.
mention it, I would jump up and down in my chair. It is no longer one of their top 3 recommendations.
I guess the only other point I would make is just an observation that whatever estimate for a middle school that was made a couple of years ago may be substantially less than what's going to be required if there's going to be any steel or other imported items. I know the Nagog water treatment plant, we've been told, is probably going to be quite a lot more expensive than what it would have been 2 or 3 years ago. Who knows what the future is going to be, but just keep that in mind, that there will be different numbers than what was estimated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more comments from the public? Okay.
Move to
Can I
adjourn.
get a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Thank you, Dean.
Red Sox are winning 1-0.